Could you tell me more?
The AHA versus HaHa project, we examine specifically clever humor used by brands in their communication.
Does it mean that I should go on my Instagram or Twitter and start praising all my competitors?
So again, it comes down to
It might be difficult if you're a global brand, right?
it might be difficult, but not impossible. You can have.
So it's not that, oh, I gave you baby carrots and chicken, so now I deserve something better.
Yes, so it's really not that the parent is trying to treat themselves. It's really that
Ling, we have worked in the same building for quite a while at the University of Hong Kong.
Yep.
But for all those people who have not had a chance to meet you yet, who are you and what is your expertise?
Hi, Philip. My name is Lingrui Zhou. I'm currently an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Hong Kong, and I study how different types of relationships between both brands and consumers affect consumer perceptions and decision making.
Then it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I hope so.
I read that you are an expert in marketing and psychology.
I would say that I have studied marketing and psychology for a very long time. I was a psychology major in undergrad, got my PhD in marketing at Duke University, and now I continue to study marketing at HKU. And so I would say I'm quite familiar with the different theories in psychology and marketing, but as an academic, we are constantly learning new things every single day. So it's something that I'm still actively researching and engaging in.
AHA versus HaHa. This is your study on how brands come across funny or smart and how it benefits them with their relation with consumers. Could you tell me more?
Yeah, so for the AHA versus HaHa project, we examine specifically clever humor used by brands in their communications. So, for example, a brand can make a funny joke on Twitter and consumers can see it. But whether that joke is just purely funny or cleverly funny, it's a little bit different. So, what we mean by clever humor is that the humor needs to involve the consumer in that the consumer has to make some mental connection. They have to get the joke. So the joke can be something like a reference to popular culture, wordplay, something that just gets the consumer thinking a little bit more. Here's an example. If you were a delivery app, you can say something like, when you want ramen instantly, but not instant ramen. So it's a joke, but it's a little bit more clever because it involves some wordplay and the consumer has to understand that joke. And so what we find is that clever humor compared to just regular use of humor or just regular normal brand communications, it increases our liking of that brand. And we find that this effect occurs because this clever humor signals that the brand is both warm and competent. So, warm meaning that the brand comes off as friendlier, nicer because they're making a joke, and more competent because they're making a clever joke. They seem a little bit smarter than other brands. So, this clever humor leading to both warmth and competence, which then leads to better attitudes towards that brand.
Would it be a danger for a brand to have that humor too smart?
Yes, it could be a hit or a miss, definitely. You do have to really understand the consumer first before making that type of joke because we do find in our research that if the consumers they don't get the joke, then it falls flat. You are not going to receive any of the benefits that you would have gotten. And so it's very important to understand that maybe a joke you and I find funny, someone else doesn't find funny. So we first have to understand our target audience before communicating with them in a humorous or clever way.
I think there was a huge case with Abercrombie and Finch a couple of years ago, right? When they missed their humor.
Yeah, yeah. So it can be very dangerous for brands. And sometimes we're so in our own little bubble that we can make a joke that comes off as offensive to another culture. And unfortunately, this has happened many times, as we have seen. Um, So it is, again, very important to first start from understanding what the consumers are looking for. And so what type of jokes might land with that group of consumers.
Well, in today's world, anything you say might offend someone.
Yes.
So how do the brands balance that? How should they balance it?
The branding landscape is so competitive these days, you are trying to stand out compared to other brands. And maybe that's why some brands are doing riskier things that result in them getting canceled or offending their consumers. And so, what I would recommend is really to, think about ways of using humor or other types of communication styles that showcase your brand's personality, not crossing the line in which you might end up offending the consumers. So, just kind of really truly understanding what joke you're actually making and if that is going to land
Hmm.
with that group.
If you were advising a brand new brand, what would be your advice for them to start communicating with their consumers properly?
I think the first and most important thing is to come off as being genuine and authentic because consumers these days are very smart and they're very skeptical of a lot of different types of brand communications. And the consumers, they're expecting you to communicate in a way that, convinces the consumers to buy your product, right? And so engaging in some types of communications that show off your authenticity and that you don't see your consumers as your cash cows, then that can help build that trust and that bond between the brand and the consumer. So, doing something like telling a joke, it can be something that signals to the consumer, oh, this brand is funny. They have a personality. They're communicating with me in a way that they're not always just trying to sell me something. Their joke can be maybe related to their own products, maybe related to the brand, or maybe even unrelated at all. And that can be a way to show off that you are being genuine in your communications and to kind of override that consumer skepticism to build this relationship with them.
When you say authentic, it's I think like a very trendy word these days. What does
Mhm.
it really mean? Because a brand is a brand and it
Yes.
sells things. So all of them are authentic in the way that they want to sell you something, right? What's
Yes.
the other side of the authentic?
So the other side of the authenticity is really coming off in a way that doesn't raise suspicion from the consumer. And of course, authenticity brands are, trying to sell their products. But whether they actually value the consumers themselves or do they just value the money, that's a little bit different. In my perspective, authenticity really comes off when they showcase that they do value the well being of the consumers themselves. So they care about providing the best products or the best services to the consumers. But beyond that, they also value this long term commitment to their consumers. And by showcasing that they value their consumers, then the consumers can actually trust them to act in ways that benefit the consumers or they keep the consumers in mind so that, their actions are not all about just taking money.
So other than providing good quality product, would you be able to give me an example of what is how the brand can show that they care about the customer?
Yeah, so one way that brands can really show that they care about the consumers is that they take into account consumer feedback. They have to really manage their consumers when they're upset. They have to show that they are willing to put in effort to really satisfy the consumers beyond just making that point of sale. Your relationship with the consumer, it's not over when you make that sale, it actually continues far afterwards. And in order to maintain that relationship even post sale, doing things like asking for feedback, incorporating that feedback, just having be willing to have open communication with the consumer can be a way to signal that the brand truly cares about being better for the consumer.
Would that differ across cultures?
Yes, I definitely do think that different types of communication will come across differently in different cultures. Even going back to my jokes paper, we know, of course, that certain jokes are going to land in certain cultures versus others. Even things like pop culture references, if you're making a joke about American football, obviously that's going to land well in America and probably not as well in somewhere like China. And again, it comes off as you really need to understand the consumer first. And as human beings, oftentimes we are just living in our own bubbles and we might not be exposed to the cultures that we might be trying to communicate with. So it's important to take that first step to do that first before you risk the chance of communicating wrongly with that culture.
Why humor? Are you funny? Do you think you have got a good sense of humor?
Well, I like to say that I have a good sense of humor. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily a funny person. I would not be able to tell you a joke off the top of my head. Um, but humor was interesting because me and my co-authors, we were just kind of, browsing social media, kind of observing the different ways that brands have been communicating. And we did notice that there were some brands who like to utilize humor and some brands that like to utilize clever humor. But the use of clever humor has not been studied in much detail before in our field. So we decided, hey, let's see what the unique effects of clever humor are compared to just regular humor or other types of communications.
What are the unique effects?
So the unique effects of clever humor is that it can actually boost brand attitudes and brand choice and brand engagement compared to regular use of humor. So, for an example, we looked at a bunch of tweets that a lot of brands have made and have run some experiments testing this as well. And we find that clever humor usually results in more likes and retweets and comments compared to regular uses of humor. So, if your brand does care about social media engagement, then clever humor could be a way to boost that.
And this will always come down to social media, or can it be extended to other media?
It can definitely be extended to other media as well. Just in general, clever humor will boost consumer interest in that brand. So their attitudes and perceptions of that brand will be more favorable and boosted in that way compared to other types of communications.
Now, you mentioned that you also look at brand to brand relation. What
Yes.
does that mean?
So I have another area of research, a paper that was published about 2 or 3 years ago called the effects of brand to brand praise on consumer perceptions. So that really looks at the communications between brands. So in that paper, we specifically examine what happens when a brand praises a competitor of theirs. So, as an example, Coke and Pepsi have a great rivalry. How do consumers feel when they see Coke praising Pepsi? And what are the downstream consequences? And so, what we find in that paper is that for the brand doing the praising, when Coke praises Pepsi, consumers form more favorable attitudes towards Coke, but not necessarily Pepsi. And this kind of goes against the traditional mantra that we've learned in marketing of you should never mention your competitors in a positive light. Or if you do mention your competitors, you should be saying, this is how we're better than our competitors, right? That's a very common thing that marketers do. And so we kind of try to show this more counterintuitive way in which positive interactions with your competitors can bring about positive benefits to your brand.
Should we be careful when saying that? Because I'm sure other marketers going with the more traditional way of contrasting their brands with others also based that actions on some research
Yes.
in previous years.
Yes.
How does your research change the whole context and what makes it more true than the previous ones?
Yeah. So the previous types of research that have been done on the more traditional methods, there are some positives and negatives to using those tactics. But the unique thing about brand to brand praise is that it's incredibly suitable for the digital world that we currently live in. So, in today's digital world, especially on social media, it gives this unique platform for brands to interact with each other and be observed by consumers, which normally wouldn't have happened, 20 years ago. Brand to brand communications usually happens on the back end and consumers would never see it. And so, what's unique about brand to brand praise is that it's very easy for a brand to say they tweet on social media. Let's say, actually, the gaming industry has been doing this. So, when Nintendo Switch, they launch a new product, Xbox or PlayStation, they can tweet on Twitter and say, hey, congratulations, Nintendo, on your new launch. And this is kind of part of what inspired this research is that some specific brands have been doing this. So I was interested in what would be the downstream consequences of those types of interactions.
Does it mean that I should go on my Instagram or Twitter and start praising all my competitors?
So again, it comes down to doing it in a more authentic way.
Okay.
I think if you were just blasting praises all the time on your social media, that probably won't work. It will probably rouse some suspicion from consumers. But, when it comes to a big launch by your competitors, that's definitely a great opportunity to jump into the conversation. Maybe everybody else is talking about, oh, there's this new launch from this brand. Your brand can then kind of take it as an opportunity to do something nice and bring some attention to your own brand by giving your competitors a compliment. And this doesn't work in all situations. So, what we find is that if for some reason, when you praise a brand, it elicits some feelings of betrayal from the consumer, then that's not going to work. So, if you are, as a consumer, if you are extremely loyal to a brand and you actually really hate their competitors, then you don't really want to see your brand praising
All
the
right.
enemy.
Are there particular segments or brands for which that might work better?
So, one thing about brand to brand praise is that the relationship between the praiser and the praisee, they do have to be competitors in the same industry. So, it works if you are a glasses brand and you are praising another glasses brand, but it's not going to work if you are a glasses brand and you're, let's say, praising a soda brand, because praising another glasses brand is what signals that you are a company that is willing to interact with your competitors in a positive way that goes against traditional marketing. And so this interaction shows to the consumer that your brand, you're kind, you value other members of the community, and you're also confident in yourself to be praising a competitor in the same industry. But those signals are not there when you are praising someone who's not in your industry. Who you're aiming the praise at is going to be very important. Another thing is that we find in our research that the effects of brand to brand praise, it's more pronounced for-profit brands compared to nonprofit brands. So even though nonprofit brands can benefit, it's to a lesser extent than for-profit brands. And this is because the nonprofit brands, they are already doing good for society. So they're already seen as very warm, and so they're not going to receive as many benefits from doing the praise because they're already perceived as very warm. There's not much room for them to grow in that regard. But for profit brands, they do seem in general colder. And so there's more room to show that they are warm and they care about their community and they care about, being friendly and nice. And so engaging in brand to brand praise for the for-profit brands, they are able to benefit a little bit more.
The only concern I would have would be am I endorsing the other brand?
Mhm. So you might wonder that if I praise my competitor, is that going to bring more positive attention to that competitor? And what we actually find is that this is not necessarily true. So, in our experiments, we look at perceptions of both the praiser brand and the brand that's getting praised. And we consistently find that the benefits usually go towards the brand doing the praising, but not the brand on the receiving end. So, for example, we actually ran a study where we looked at KitKat versus Twix. So consumers saw a tweet from KitKat in which they either praised Twix, saying, Twix are delicious, or KitKat just engaged in normal brand communication, saying, KitKats are great. And so after seeing those two tweets, we let the consumers go back into their daily lives. We recontacted these consumers 11 days after they saw the initial tweet, and we asked them, did you purchase any KitKats over the past 11 days? And what we found was that those who saw the praise tweet, those who saw KitKat praising Twix, they were 34% more likely to have purchased a KitKat during those 11 days, whereas the likelihood of purchasing Twix did not change across conditions. So this shows that the benefits of brand to brand praise, it's really just going to the praiser and not the brand on the receiving end.
In another research called Food Share Backfires, you were looking at how parents choose healthy food for their children, and at the same time, they are choosing unhealthy food for themselves. How does that happen?
Yes. So, in another stream of my research, I'm looking at interpersonal decision making. And what we find is that for parents, for caregivers, when they do choose a healthy option for their child, they end up choosing an unhealthy option for themselves a lot of the time. And this happens when there is an option of sharing food with your child. So, for example, your child, you want them to eat healthy. You have a goal for them to be healthy, which a lot of parents do have. And so you choose the grilled chicken sandwich and baby carrots for your child. But then you, as a parent, you are going to have the concern that your child might not enjoy their food. They're not going to eat that food. And so, because you have this concern, you end up choosing burgers and fries for yourself, thinking that your food can serve as a backup option in case your child doesn't want to eat their healthy options. So, it's really because we kind of have this association between healthy foods and them not tasting as good as unhealthy foods. And so that leads the parents to really have this more negative decision for themselves in which they eat the more unhealthy option.
That would be contextualized in a restaurant or also for like home cooking?
Yes, so it could be in any scenario in which there is the possibility of you sharing your food with your child. So it could be at a restaurant, it could be, maybe at school, you're having a field day. And so we find this effect when the option of sharing is present with your child. So you can interact with your child and share your food, but the effects do not occur if you and your child are eating separately. So if there is no potential of you guys sharing the food, then the parent is more likely to choose the healthy option for themselves.
Does this happen only with parents or are there any other scenarios for that?
In our research, we study the parent child relationship, but it could also potentially extend to other caregiving relationships as long as the caregiver is concerned about the eating habits of whoever they're taking care of, and they are concerned about the other person not eating their food.
So it's not that, oh, I gave you baby carrots and chicken, so now I deserve something better. It's Because it's the other option in case this one is a misfire.
Yes, so it's really not that the parent is trying to treat themselves. It's really that their focus is so much on their child and making sure their child is in the best position possible. And so they're willing to make that sacrifice in their own food choice by picking the unhealthy food for their child.
Is there anything that the brands could learn from it?
Yes, there are definitely things that brands can learn from this research. And it's really that we are very focused, for example, on the health and eating habits of children, and there's less focus on how that can affect the caregiver. And so, from a restaurant's perspective or even from a policy making perspective, it's important to think about the entire ecosystem, right? So if the caregiver, because they're making sacrifices for their children or whoever they're taking care of, and they end up making more unhealthy decisions for themselves, then of course that can negatively impact the caregiver. And if the caregiver ends up being more stressed or they're eating more unhealthily, then that could, as a consequence, negatively impact those that they're caring for as well. So it's really important to think more holistically and how we can encourage more healthy eating habits for the overall ecosystem.
If you were to advise a brand, like let's say a restaurant,
Mhm.
what would you tell them to change on the menu?
So instead of perhaps changing specific menu items, the restaurants might want to think about changing the mindsets of the caregivers. So, what we find in our research is that this healthy choice for child, unhealthy choice for the caregiver, it happens because the parents have a very present focus on the current situation. I'm worried that my child is not going to eat their food in this moment. And what we find is that the effect can be lessened when you engage in a more future oriented mindset for the parents. So, if you get the parents to think about long term goals, I want my child to develop more long term healthy habits, then you're more thinking about, can I set a good example for my child? How am I going to curate these healthy habits for my child in the future? And so when that happens, the parent is then more likely to choose a healthy option for themselves compared to the present oriented focus. And so what restaurants can do is, of course, they can make healthier foods, and they can also choose to kind of help the parents engage in a more future oriented mindset.
This sounds like a mission and impossible because what can one restaurant do really? Then they would have to like have a combined approach towards it, right?
Yes, so it's not easy, and oftentimes it doesn't, involve some policymakers to kind of encourage this as well. The U.S. Surgeon General recently has called for more attention on the healthy habits of caregivers.
Mm.
So there has been calls in the past to focus on healthy choices for children, and now there are some platforms that have put on more attention for the caregiver's decision making as well. And so, with the combined efforts, I think that there can be some progress made in that respect, in which, educating consumers more and just also aligning healthy foods with taste is also something that's important to do as well, and kind of trying to lessen that perception that healthy foods taste bad. There are healthy foods out there that taste good, and encouraging choices of those options can be useful as well.
And is it limited only to food industry or does it go beyond that?
So, in our research, we focus on food choices. So, I can't say empirically if it applies to other domains as well, but I think overall there is this theme of caregivers sacrificing either time, money, their healthy choices for their child or whoever they're taking care of. So, maybe potentially you can think of other domains, for example, you're trying to get your child involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. So you're spending a lot of your time driving your kid to piano practice and then to tutoring, et cetera, and that can be very time consuming and stressful for the caregiver as well, and perhaps that can lead also to some negative downstream consequences for the caregiver. So overall, there is this concept of the caregiver often putting the needs of their child before themselves. And you do have to think, is that really going to benefit the entire ecosystem in the long run if the caregiver is feeling stressed, or maybe they're eating a lot of unhealthy food, so they're feeling lethargic? Is that going to negatively impact their caregiving in the long term? So that's why we do have to think about the caregiver's health and how to, better take care of the caregivers overall.
I noticed you use the word caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
That means it can be extended from parent to child, but also other family members or even non-family relationships like professional relationships or partnerships.
So I do think it can be extended to other types of relationships, but that relationship has to be close and tight enough for the caregiver to truly incorporate that decision that they're making really into themselves and that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I would probably say that more professional relationships, you're not really close enough to have that extreme sort of care and concern for the person that you're taking care of. But maybe in some extreme instances, it can happen for different types of relationships. We just very commonly see this in parent-child relationships because that is kind of that dynamic where the caregiver oftentimes is making a decision for their child,
Right.
and then afterwards they have to make a decision for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, it will be very interesting to see the research on, like, let's say, the good boss.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So definitely there is plenty of room for future research
Mm-hmm.
to study other types of relationships as well.
How can brands use this knowledge to better connect with the parents?
Brands can use this knowledge to better connect with parents by also signaling that they do care about the well-being of the parents as well as the child. And again, it has to do with going back and thinking about the entire ecosystem. And so if the parents, the caregivers, feel that the brand cares about them as a caregiver and they also care about their children as well, then the parents, they can end up trusting that brand more and thinking that the brand has the well intentions for their whole family. And it might be difficult to do, but it is possible for the brand to give some signals and show that they do care about the whole family or the whole ecosystem, whether it's having clear, more thoughtful communications with the parents, showcasing that they're providing healthy options for both the kids and the parents. There are multiple things that brands can do to showcase that they care.
Mm-hmm. I have one question going back to the brand-to-brand marketing. So you said that if a brand is positively speaking about the other brand, it might have a positive effect on their marketing. Would the opposite be true? If the brand is negatively sending messages about the other brand, would it have a negative effect?
Negative engagements in general will lead to more negative perceptions of that brand that is engaging in that negative communication. But of course, you can think about instances in which that's not the case. Wendy's, as an example, if you look at their social media, they're known for roasting other brands or other consumers, but they have built an entire personality around that. And consumers think it's funny, engaging, exciting. They do like it when Wendy's roasts other people or brands. And so it works well for Wendy's. But if you were some other brand that is not well known for this or doesn't have this type of personality, and then all of a sudden you are trash talking maybe some of your competitors, the consumers are not going to like that in general. It's probably going to decrease their perceptions of your brand. You're being mean, unkind, and I would probably not recommend it unless you are someone like Wendy's.
Mm-hmm. Or unless you can build up this image of yourself.
Yes, exactly. Unless you have that goal of building up your image and you can do it in a way that is not going to offend the consumers.
Okay, with clever humor.
Yes, so perhaps with clever humor or just really tapping into whatever the consumers are into in that moment and that they will socially accept.
Right. Mm-hmm. What next level tricks would you share with the brands to improve their marketing these days? Because you said we are transitioning or we are living in the new era of marketing where all rules may not always apply. Mm-hmm. What's the top of your recent research marketing strategies?
I think one tip I might have for marketers is to, I would say, broaden their horizons. There are a lot of interesting things that brands are doing in different industries to keep the attention on them or to be more engaging with consumers. And I would say to not only look at your industry, most of the time we are focused on what is around us and what is familiar to us. And so I think one thing that might be helpful is, maybe if you're in luxury marketing, you take a look at what the guys over in technology are doing. And if they're doing something well, then perhaps you can look at their strategies and see if they are applicable to your own industry or your own field. I actually do this a lot in my own research, so I do look at a lot of interpersonal relationships between brands and consumers, but I often go to talks on subject areas like AI, sustainability, to see what they're doing in those fields, in those topic areas that perhaps could be applied to my own research as well. So I would say overall, just keep an open mind and dabble in a little bit in some areas that you normally wouldn't expose yourself to. And it can get you thinking about different strategies or give you an idea about something that perhaps hasn't been done before in your industry.
Mm-hmm. And if you were writing a playbook for somebody who's just starting branding and marketing, what would the first chapter be about?
The first chapter would definitely be about taking that first step to talk to your consumers, to understand your consumers first. I do think a lot of times we think, well, this strategy, I think it's a great idea, or I would respond well to this strategy. And so everybody else must respond well to this strategy as well. But that's definitely not the case. And where I think a lot of the blunders from brands might come from is that they didn't take that first step to put themselves in the shoes of the consumers, of different types of consumers, and see what they might respond well to and what these consumers might dislike. And so I would definitely say to focus on the consumers first, maybe interview them, talk to them, or even run some surveys with them, just to get a better understanding of who your target audience is, what are the areas or the cultures that they embrace, and how can you best communicate with them in a way that suits their style. And I think taking that first step, starting with that consumer, and then thinking about your branding strategies, that can put your brand ahead in the long run and also showcase that your brand is more about just making profits, is that you are actually caring about your consumers, caring about their feedback, and caring about what they actually want.
It might be difficult if you're a global brand, right? Because you need to market to the entire spectrum of cultures.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So for global brands, it might be difficult, but not impossible. You can have, your localized team perhaps thinking about things that can connect to one culture more, or in one country more, and utilizing those trends in that country compared to some other types of communications in other countries, I do think it is worth it to take that time to make the effort to adapt to the cultures in different regions.
What is a small habit that you've cultivated to think faster?
A small habit that I've cultivated to help my thinking is really to kind of take a moment to self-reflect, maybe once or a couple times a day, and to really think, hey, I just encountered this experience. Did I feel positive? Did I feel negative? What about that experience made me feel positive or negative? To try to get into why certain things work and why certain things might not work. And taking that moment to kind of self-reflect, of course, it can allow yourself to have a better understanding of yourself and how you operate. But it can also give you new ideas in terms of what brands are doing that is good or bad, right? So I saw an ad that I thought was funny. What about that ad was actually making me feel positive? Was it their actual use of humor? Was it the colors that they used in their advertising? So kind of taking a minute to break down your own perceptions and to kind of think about what's going on in your mind, and then taking that, maybe if it's something unique, perhaps talking to other consumers as well, like, hey, did you see that advertisement? What did you think about it? And piecing together the things that cause you to feel that certain way. And that really allows you to kind of get at the underlying mechanism for what was good that this brand did that maybe you can then apply to your own life or to your own marketing strategy. So in my life, I would say that's something that I try to do every now and then. And I do think it can really help you understand your own thought processes as well as these thought processes behind other people. And if it's, something that a lot of consumers are all going through, then that can be a good thing to know for the brand.
Influencers marketing. What's your take on that?
There has been more and more research on influencer marketing and how that can benefit brands. And a lot of the research does point to certain types of influencer marketing that is very good for certain brands. So for example, I think there was a paper recently that showcased how for a lot of brands, having more medium to smaller size influencers doing the promotion might end up getting you more clicks or more engagement compared to sponsoring really big influencers. Of course, it kind of depends on the category or the certain influencer or the situation. There's also some research that showcases how the influencer does their promotion is also important. A lot of brands, when they contact an influencer, they say, hey, I want you to say this, this, and this about my brand. Versus some other brands are a little bit more loose. Like, I want you to mention my brand, but you can incorporate your own style or your own experience into that message. And so what the research finds is that the more genuine, more authentic influencers, they're not reading off a script, they're kind of showcasing their own personality and connecting it to the brand. That works a lot better than having, point A, point B, point C that the influencer has to hit on. So again, it comes back to that feeling, that concept of authenticity. And if you are going to engage in influencer marketing, try to let the influencers have their own personality shine through, and that will come off as more genuine to the consumer.
I think it's kind of obvious. I still wonder why some brands don't go
Yeah.
for advertisement.
Yeah, exactly. You might think, well, they should all be doing it, but yeah, a lot of brands don't. So yeah, I think, perhaps there's still a disconnect between maybe academia and brands where they kind of already have their own opinions of how something should work, and maybe they're not as open to new ideas.
It might be also a compliance issue.
Yeah.
I like to set up a challenge for our viewers. Let's set up a challenge for what someone could do every day, a single small habit they could develop to become better marketers.
Yeah, so a small habit that anybody could do every day, I would say maybe to, again, taking a pause, being more observant about the things around you, either when you're browsing through social media instead of just scrolling through, maybe take a pause if you like something, taking that time to think through what about it was good that made you like it, and just taking a pause to observe and reflect. I think that's something that we can spare 30 seconds a day doing. If something catches your eye, if something you find is interesting, take a minute to think about what about it was good and what about it was something that you liked, or was it a marketing strategy that you can take and apply it somewhere else. So as we are going through our day-to-day lives, we are constantly bombarded with a lot of stimuli and information all of the time. And so taking a break, taking a pause to actually look around and process what we're seeing can perhaps generate some information or new ideas for you.
Stop browsing mindlessly, freeze the moment, and think about it.
Yes, freeze the moment and think about it. That's a great way to put it.
Okay. Ling, it was a great pleasure. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I had a great time.
And I hope after this episode, everybody will improve their marketing skills.
Hopefully.
I'm sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.